Village of Meskina, the Holy Land, 1187. While the fall of night at last gives you a break from the angry hot sun, it does nothing to take away the desperate thirst that parches your throat. As a soldier in King Guy's army, you have walked miles without water in the blazing sun under relentless Saracen attack, only to find all the springs blocked off. Hunkered down for the night in this wretched village, even now they torment you. Endless drumming keeps you awake, thumping its way into your already unnerved mind. Then great shouts of "Allahu Akbar! Allahu Akbar!" echo out of the darkness. The enemy has you tightly surrounded, not letting you sleep, not letting you get water, always reminding you that they are here and they are watching. Suddenly, you hear a surprised shout from behind you. Ah! Turning around, you see a Saracen berserker has leapt into the camp. With one sweep of his blade, he beheads one of your comrades. Then he runs amok in the camp. He stabs sleeping soldiers, clashes with the sentries, all the while screaming, "Allahu Akbar!" Finally cornered by 4 soldiers and yourself, he dies hard, fighting with fanatical courage. As you breathe heavily from the fight, the wretched drums start up again. You struggle to care about the army, or King Guy, or even the kingdom. You just want water to drink, and the drums to stop. I'm your host, James Barton. Welcome to Forgotten Wars.
This country is at war with Germany.
Today, our armed forces joined our NATO allies in airstrikes against Serbian forces.
Eagle 1, first strike, you have permission to engage the target.
In the first few hours after our servicemen went to the rescue of young Americans and of democracy in Grenada,
Damals uns ausgebildet. Wollen diese 4 Jahre nützen.
Hello everyone, welcome to the show. In our last episode, things were heating up in the Holy Land. Saladin had declared a jihad and invaded the Crusader states with a vast army. A fragile unity currently exists between the Christian lords, but underneath the surface, the same old feuds and hatreds continue to bubble. In their hands rests the fate of Christian rule in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, while Saladin plots their destruction. It is to King Guy's credit that his instinctive reaction was to stall, play for time, and wear out the Muslim army without bringing them to battle. This would have been the best strategy to follow, but Saladin knew this too. He was determined to goad the Christians into a battle of his choosing. To achieve this, he would skillfully play upon the barely patched-up divisions among the Christian lords. He marched on the city of Tiberias, which was in Raymond's lands. The town fell quickly and was looted and burned. The garrison held out, but this too presented a problem. Raymond of Tripoli's wife was trapped inside, and now risked falling into Saladin's hands. It was unlikely that she would be mistreated, but the ransom would be vast, and the dishonour considerable if she were to be taken prisoner. This obviously affected Raymond, but it was also a direct challenge to King Guy as well. When I say the words feudal system, it brings up images of Monty Python-esque peasants eating mud. It's actually a bit more exciting than that. Feudalism is essentially a protection racket, little different to Tony Soprano's relationships to his capos. The king protects his peasants and vassals. In return, they provide him with taxes and loyalty. Raymond was now Guy's vassal. He was honour-bound to help him in his time of need. If he didn't, then what kind of king was he? It didn't help that Guy's legitimacy was already weak. Until Saladin's invasion, most of his lords had either been ignoring him or even calling for his overthrow. He held power mainly due to the Templars, who never let him forget it. Saladin understood these tangled webs of relationships and obligations very well, hence his choice of target. To get to Tiberias, the Crusaders would have to brave the desert, while under constant Saracen attack. The trap was set. But would the Christians fall into it? One of the most dramatic events in all medieval history would decide the future of the kingdom. In a tent packed with the Christian elite, lit by servants carrying flaming torches, they debated their strategy. It's important to note that our sole source of information for this fateful meeting is a squire called Enon, who sided with the peace party. So just remember, there is definitely some bias in his recounting. At first, Raymond seemed reluctant to speak. Many in that tent, especially among the Templars, despised him as a traitor or defying King Guy when he was first crowned. However, the king wanted to hear his counsel, so he rose to speak. He shocked everyone there, abandoned Tiberias and his wife. The risk was too great. The whole might of the Christians had been assembled. If they lost, then the whole kingdom would be defenceless before Saladin. Anul records him arguing that, between here and Tiberias, there is no water, only a little spring, and there is nothing for an army. And well do I know that as soon as you move from here, in case you will have the Saracens in front of you, and they will harass you the entire day and draw you out until they hold you all day, midway between here and Tiberias. They will make you camp despite yourself, because you will not be able to fight on account of the heat, and because sergeants will have nothing to drink, but will die of thirst. And if you attack, the Saracens will open out and withdraw into the hills, where you will not be able to penetrate. And if you camp there, what will your men and your horses drink? Are they going to remain without water? Such a course would be fatal, and the next day they will take us all, because they will have water and food and will be fresh. We shall all be killed and captured, and so I think much better to let that town go than to lose the whole land, for surely if you go there, the land is lost. Everything he predicted would come true. In the stunned silence that followed, the Templar leader, Gerard de Ridderford, face contorted with rage. He screamed, "He has a wolf's skin! Don't listen to him, my lord!" He had never forgiven Raymond for allowing another man to marry the wealthy maiden that had been promised to him. This was not a matter of love. It was his hurt pride that fueled his hate. The tent echoed with accusation and counter-accusation. Shouts of "traitor" and "fanatic." Yet Raymond's wise words seemed to have won the day. The council and the king accepted his argument. They would wait out Saladin's army until it disintegrated. His hands balled into fists, breathing heavily and staring at Raymond with demonic loathing. Gerard seemed to have been defeated. His hatred of Raymond and Muslims in general had poisoned his mind. He wanted battle, no matter how poor the odds against success. Sadly for the Crusader states, he had one last card to play. As the nobility retired for the night, he visited the king's tent. Let's head there now.
Crux invicta, lux divina, terra tremit sub hosteruente, gladius sanctus.
You are a young squire in the service of Count Raymond. You laugh and joke with your fellow squires as you complete your chores, looking forward to a well-earned rest. As you walk past the king's tent, you hear a voice screaming in rage. Who would talk to the king like that? Hiding behind some horses, you eavesdrop, getting snatches of the conversation. Raymond called you a coward when you last refused to fight Saladin. You think he has suddenly had a change of heart? He lies to you. It would be foolish to believe him. It was the Templars who put the crown on your head. It is we who made you master of Jerusalem. It is due to me that you can call yourself a king. How long would you last if I withdraw my support? Another voice speaks, too quiet to hear. Then another roar. Lead the army into battle. God wills it. Or be cursed as a coward and lose your throne. Then a figure marches out of the tent, and you recognize Gerard. His face lit up by a triumphant smirk. A deep sense of foreboding grips your soul. One of the great ironies of the Battle of Hattin is that the Christians knew it was a trap. Even Guy, for all his faults, knew how dangerous a gamble he was taking. Yet he would lead his army into Saladin's trap. Why? Lingering mistrust of Raymond and fear of being called a coward, of losing Templar support, of losing his throne. He needed to prove once and for all, maybe even to himself, that he was worthy as a successor to the warrior kings of old. When Saladin heard that the Christians were marching on Tiberias, he smiled and announced that dawn was about to break on the night of unbelief. It was high summer, and the hot sun beat down on the Christians as they marched out of Symphorus. Immediately, they were relentlessly attacked by Saracen-mounted archers. Casualties were heavy, and they had only covered 6 miles before they staggered into the town of Turin. There was a fountain here, although it was barely adequate to cool the throats of 20,000 men, together with their horses and pack animals. Ahead of them lay an arid wasteland, across which Saladin had sent outriders to fill in every well and block every spring they could find. His own army was supplied from the rear by camel trains bringing water up from the Sea of Galilee. He was determined not to allow the Crusaders the same comfort. Rather than resting his army at Turin, Guy insisted they resume the march, hoping to cover the remaining 9 miles to Tiberias by nightfall. Having already made a huge gamble against the odds, by deciding to relieve Tiberius, Guy was now making another reckless bet with his force. In 1182, a Muslim-harassed Frankish army in the same region had advanced only 8 miles in one day, while in 1183, Guy himself had managed only 6 miles in a similar situation. He must have known how unlikely it was that he could cover the full distance to Tiberius. Yet having made his decision, he seemed unable to turn back or to stop himself continuing to raise the stakes. Saladin could not believe his luck, later writing that Satan incited Guy to do what ran counter to his purpose. A sense of deep foreboding gripped the Crusader army. It was said that as they marched, the king's chamberlain looked at the scorching midsummer sky above them and watched an eagle soar over the royal army, holding in its talons a crossbow with 7 bolts, representing the 7 deadly sins, and crying out in a terrible voice, "Woe to you, Jerusalem!" Only Gerard was optimistic. Some claimed they had never seen him happier. For me, that would have been a worse portent of disaster than the alleged talking eagle. As soon as Guy's army left Turan, the Saracens scrambled to take the town, cutting off the possibility of retreat and any hope of maintaining a water supply from the rear. Parched with thirst, the army slowly shuffled along. The Saracens held the high ground on both sides, raking the Christians with arrows and picking off stragglers. After a full day's march in these horrific conditions, their reward was to be surrounded by Saladin's army, still miles from Tiberius. Getting desperate, the Christians tried to change direction towards the natural springs of Kafir Hattin. But Saladin's forces blocked the way, and they were forced to camp for the night on a rocky, exposed, dust-dry plateau near to the village of Meskina. We have reached the dramatization at the start of this episode. They were hemmed in so tightly by the Saracens that, according to one chronicler, if a cat had fled from the Christian host, it could not have escaped without the Saracens taking it. Saladin used the full range of psychological warfare techniques. Drums, chanting, loud prayers and berserkers, combined with a raging thirst, made it a miserable night for the Crusaders as they camped under the starry sky. Just to the northeast of the camp loomed the twin rocky mounds of an extinct volcano known as the Horns of Hattin. As the morning broke, the Crusaders were thirsty, demoralized, and exhausted. Little did they know, Saladin had still more tricks up his sleeve. Rather than attacking straight away, he let the army stagger on, while his men set fire to the desert scrub. You are a soldier in Saladin's army. Morale is sky high after years of humiliation and bloodshed. Finally, the Holy Land is about to be liberated. You watch as the Christians stagger through the billowing black smoke from the fires you've started. It blinds them, while also a reminder of the fire and brimstone that soon awaits them in hell. At a word from your officer, you raise your bow, an arrow tensed and waiting to fire. Then on command, the arrows fly and hit their marks in the Crusader army. Panic breaks out. So many fall dead and wounded. As they try to get information, you continue to pepper them with arrows. Through the smoke, you see a Christian soldier crawling on the ground, 3 arrows sticking out of him. Still he struggles on, obstacles of dead men and horses blocking his way, until a 4th arrow finally puts him out of his misery. War truly is terrible, but the Crusaders have brought this day of judgment on themselves. God wills it, you think, as you prepare to fire more arrows. As arrows rain down, Guy ordered his cavalry to try and break through the Saracen lines. It was brutal fighting, neither side giving an inch or any quarter. Then Saladin played yet another trick. One charge was led by Raymond and the deputy leader of the Templars. As they neared the Muslim lines, suddenly they parted and let the cavalry through. Seeing the supposed breakthrough, part of Guy's infantry tried to flee as well. But then the Saracen lines closed once again. The trapped infantry were slaughtered. Cut off from the men they were meant to be leading, and realistically having no way back, Raymond and his companions fled. Morale among the remaining infantry broke down at this sight. The fighting, the smoke, the thirst, the arrows. It was all too much to take. Panic spread through Guy's ranks. Parched infantrymen broke for the Sea of Galilee, which appeared tantalizingly close. Saladin's men decimated them and drove the survivors back against the horns of Hattin, the twin volcanic peaks along the line of march. Such was a desperate situation that 5 knights went over to the Muslim leaders to beg that they be mercifully put to death. With his infantry out of the fight, King Guy and his remaining cavalry fought on. Saladin himself recounted the ferocity of the combat. The eyes of spears were directed at their hearts. Rivers of swords sought out their livers. The horses' hooves massed dust, clouds for them. Showers of arrows, shooting out sparks, were sent down on them, merged together by the thunder of neighing horses, with the lightning of polished swords flashing alongside them. Finally, King Guy ordered his men to make a final stand on the slopes of the horns of Hattin. His bright red command tent was put up. The true cross, which was believed to have brought victory so many times to the Christians, was raised. By now, many of the knights were fighting on foot because their horses became vulnerable once the infantry cover was withdrawn. The battle raged on. Then a truly devastating blow to Crusader morale occurred. The Bishop of Acre, who had been carrying the true cross, was killed. Their most holy relic fell into Muslim hands. It must have felt like God had forsaken them. In one last, desperate gamble for survival, Guy ordered his forces to focus on Saladin and his bodyguards. If they killed the great Muslim general and sultan, then his army would disintegrate. What few knights were still mounted made one last desperate charge to try and kill Saladin, who was mounted and clearly identifiable among his troops. This charge was probably led by the famous knight Balian of Iblis. While the charge came close enough to Saladin for him to have to shout encouragement to his men, like Raymond before him, once Iblis was through the enemy, he had no chance of fighting his way back uphill through the ever-thickening ranks of Saladin's soldiers, closing in on their prey. All was now lost. Finally, Guy's tent was overrun. Saladin dismounted his horse, prostrated himself in thanks to God, and wept for joy. King Guy had made one of the biggest gambles in military history. He had allowed himself to be bullied into seeking battle, had decided to take a route that was certainly a trap, and then not made proper provision for water supplies for his army. The dice came up snake eyes. The Franks suffered their worst defeat in crusading history. Of the roughly 20,000 Christian soldiers who had set out from Sepphoris, only about 3,000 infantry managed to escape into the surrounding countryside. Eventually, they would take refuge in the remaining castles and walled towns that were still in Christian hands, while the 1,200 knights and barons that had marched into battle, only 4 barons, including Raymond and Iblin, escaped capture, along with about 200 knights. King Guy, Gerard, Reynald, the Grand Master of the Hospitallers, and virtually the entire nobility of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were now prisoners of Saladin. Those who survived the Battle of Hattin were at Saladin's mercy, to be executed or imprisoned as their position warranted. Many were led away into captivity and sold into slavery. One Muslim scholar recounted the tale of a gleeful Saracen leading away 30 Christian soldiers, all tied together with a tent rope. The price of slaves in the markets of Damascus plummeted due to oversupply. On the evening of the 4th of July, King Guy and Reynald were brought before Saladin. Allah is truly great. The Crusaders defeated. The way is open to liberating the Holy Land. As an aid to Saladin, this is a great time to be alive. And now the Christian king and the infamous Reynald bow before your master. The Sultan comforts the parched, defeated and terrified king, handing him a cup of iced julep to quench his thirst. By ancient custom, Guy is now under his protection and cannot be harmed. When Guy hands the water to Reynald, the Sultan's eyes harden. As I did not give you the water, Reynald, you are not under my protection. He informs the man who once threatened to destroy Mecca. Guy looks increasingly worried as Saladin insults Reynald and lists his crimes. Only if you convert to Islam will your life be saved. Reynald snarls at him and spits on the ground in defiance. With a flash of steel, Saladin's blade slices down. However, in his excitement, he misses Reynald's neck, instead cutting off his arm. As the Crusader lays bleeding and moaning on the floor, you rush forward and finish off the worst infidel in the land. Saladin had kept his pledge to kill Reynald. Guy was inevitably nervous after seeing the brutal killing of his vassal, but Saladin assured him that he was safe. The Templars would not be so lucky. Just like his contemporary and future rival, Richard the Lionheart, Saladin could be remarkably brutal as well as chivalrous. The Knights of the Temple and of the Hospital had been the best fighters the Crusaders had. Saladin declared that he would purify the lands of these two unclean orders, whose practices are useless, who never give up their hostility, and who have no use as slaves. The one and the other are the worst of the infidels. Every prisoner who was a knight in the holy military orders was beheaded. Yet one was kept alive. Ironically, it was the man who was most responsible for the disaster at Hattin. That's right, Gerard somehow survived. He would remain a prisoner for years in the dungeons of Saladin, before being ransomed by the Templars for a huge sum. Honestly, they should have just left him to rot there. Hattin had been a devastating body blow to the Crusader states, both militarily and psychologically. They were now defenceless and leaderless, as Saladin's forces advanced. Without help from Western Europe, they were doomed. On July the 5th, Tiberius, the city Guy had been trying to relieve, surrendered. After Hattin, there was no fight left in the defenders. 5 days later, the economic heart of the kingdom, Acre, likewise surrendered without a fight. On July the 26th, the castle of Toron followed, and just 3 days later, Sidon too surrendered. On August the 6th, Beirut capitulated. All without a fight. Meanwhile, cities that were famous from the Bible fell one by one. Nablus, Nazareth, Haifa, Hebron, Chezerah, Asur, Lydda, Ramallah, Mirabel, Iblin, and Bethlehem all fell bloodlessly to the Saracens in the months immediately following the Battle of Hattin. Some historians claim that this rapid collapse shows the Kingdom of Jerusalem was fundamentally rotten at the core, that it was inherently unstable, even that the native population was indifferent to or welcomed the return of Muslim rule. That is too harsh judgment, ignoring the fact that there was no one left to resist. After Hattin, all that was left behind in the castles, towns, and cities were women, children, the old and the ill. There were no garrisons capable of offering an effective resistance. Worse, even if there had been, there was no point to resistance, since there was no army capable of coming to the relief of a city under siege. The choice facing the Christians when Saladin's army appeared before the walls of their fortress or city was either to surrender in exchange for their lives and such valuables as they could carry, or hopeless resistance, since the rules of warfare at the time dictated that resistance justified massacre, rape, and enslavement. It is hardly surprising that the Christian cities and castles capitulated one after the other. Despite these odds, some cities did resist. At Jaffa and Ascalon, there was street-by-street fighting that cost the Saracens dear. In retaliation, Saladin allowed his troops to plunder and enslave all the surviving inhabitants. Jerusalem itself chose to fight. Under Balin of Iblin's inspired leadership, the holy city held out for 8 epic days against the full might of the Saracen army. Before it could be overrun, Balin's skilled diplomacy persuaded Saladin to let the Christians leave the city unharmed and unenslaved. Saladin stood victorious, yet one city still defied him. Despite a long siege, he failed to take Tyre, and help for the remaining forces of the Crusader states was on the way. News of Hattin and the fall of Jerusalem had hit Western Europe like a thunderbolt from the blue. Poor Pope Urban II allegedly killed over dead at the news. Fiery sermons whipped up enthusiasm for a new crusade, led by the King of France, and a man who had become Saladin's greatest foe, Richard the Lionheart, King of England. While Saladin couldn't rest on his laurels, and the fortunes of war continued to ebb and flow for many years to come, Hattin really marks the turning point of the whole crusading movement. Never again would the Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land be as strong. Instead, Islam was now on the path to victory, long though it may be. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, leave a review, or tell a friend. In our next episode, US Marines commit one of the biggest bank robberies in history and battle voodoo priests, all in the name of Wall Street. Join me for the American occupation of Haiti, 1915 to 1934. See you next time for more Forgotten Wars.